human beings do have the desire to push and work hard to feel some sort of satisfactions with themselves.
Welcome to today's episode of the Jeff Heilman Project. A very special favor for me, am sitting next to those who are listening via the podcast or watching via YouTube, my best friend, my daughter, my beautiful little girl who's not little anymore. And it has morphed. I think our relationship has come to a point to where we really are just good friends. We call each other our Lorelai and Rory, and we just pal around. And so, Madeline, thank you. I know this is not necessarily something that you were, gung-ho about hey, let's put myself out there. But you're doing this because you love me and I love you too. So thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
And
our daughter, the oldest daughter.
Yeah.
In whom we are well pleased.
Who totally stands on her own. And I was going to ask you, what's it like? Because I'm an only child and I was a girl. What's it like growing up in a house of boys?
What's it like, or how does it make me feel? Those are two different questions.
Let's start with the first part. Let's start with what's it like, and then we'll talk about how it feels in a minute.
I have no concept of what it's like to be raised or to grow up being surrounded in a house of boys.
It's kind of like if you were to go to a birthday party and you were kind of like the one in charge of orchestrating everything. That's kind of the way I see it. It's kind of all over the place, kind of crazy, and you play a big part in helping direct and guide what happens. Most of the time with a bunch of boys.
So perhaps it has made you equipped to be able to deal with chaos.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt.
Let's also talk. I want to start this out with a shout out. You're also the only one over the age of 19 who doesn't pay rent in this house. And you don't pay rent, not because you're a girl or because we're going easy on you, but because you do a lot of stuff in the orchestration of the house as the second mom that is valuable to us, to where we feel like you're doing that in exchange for, being an adult, making your own money and not having to pay rent. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the tension between, oh my gosh, am I doing enough to help my parents out? And oh my gosh, my mom asked me to do too much, or I ask you to do too much. That's a real thing for parents that have kids living at home and kids who are living at home with their parents, to be like, how do I have this sense of identity that I'm my own person and maybe I'm not paying rent or quote unquote contributing financially to the household, and yet you contribute way more to the household than we probably even know or understand.
I mean, when I see what I do for the family, I don't really see oh, that's my identity, is I'm someone who, I've been trying to get out of that way of thinking, is oh, my identity is that I'm a second mom and I'm needed at all times to be there for them, and I can't really have a life outside of the family because they depend on me so much. I kind of have seen it like that in the past, but also I think rent in this area that we live in is, I talk to most of my friends about, I don't know, a good 60% of them don't pay rent and they live at home with their families. And honestly, if you're 28 and you live in the Bay Area with your family, I'm not really going to judge you that hard, because the Bay Area is one of the most expensive places to live in, not only one of the most expensive states to live in, but one of the most expensive areas to live in the most expensive state. So I'm not really going to judge you that hard. I think that there have been times where I would think, oh, maybe if I do pay rent, then I don't have to do as much, like some people in the family. Or maybe if I've had that longing of really, really being independent and having more responsibility But then having that responsibility doesn't really give you that freedom that I would also want at the same time.
And when we talk really, really independent, I mean, we've been having dreams about you moving to Paris and going to, like, so tell me, I was thinking about it. I even talked about it a little bit with Andrew before because we were talking about what we were going to bring up. Where do you think your love, because you have basically 3 loves, art, literature, and coffee. Vincent's one of them, but sometimes he doesn't fall into the category of art, literature, and coffee.
Art. Yeah,
so art, literature, and coffee.
Art and literature, coffee, and Vincent.
Yeah, where do you? Vincent is the dog, by the way, her puppy. Where do you think your love for like art and literary music, and not music necessarily, but art, literature? You do like music. Art, literature, and travel to Paris or Europe, Italy. I mean, you work for the best company when it comes to food. Where's this?
No name given to this.
Yeah, no name given to this establishment. Yes. But where does this kind of and one of the compliments that I hear the most about you and your look and your whole vibe is global. Like, oh, she looks global. Oh, she looks French. Oh, she looks European. Yeah. Like, where does this come from, do you think?
I just want to say that I am a white girl with a labradoodle who likes to drink coffee and read books. I am the most unique person on this planet. But I will go as far as to say that these things that I like, I know a lot about them, and I take time to learn, like coffee culture. Like, coffee is an entire language. It's like wine. There's a lot of complexity to it, and I've been learning about how to make it and what it is for the past 2 years. And there's people who dedicate their entire life to making beans and coffee and grinding beans a certain way, and it's very complex. So coffee isn't just a simple thing. It's very complicated. Same with a lot of things. But I feel like where I kind of adopted those interests, like you do with anything, is what you were surrounded with when you were growing up. Like, I think I also like to write a lot. That's what I really want to do, is I want to write books someday. And I think I got that inspirational dream. I really think I got it from watching Anne of Green Gables with Grandma, because that's what she did. She lived in Canada, and it was beautiful, and the nature and everything. And I'm so glad that I get to live in a world where there are Octobers, Yeah. And she wrote books, and that was what she did. And it's just that. Also, the 80s movies were just so good. They were amazing. Amazing movies. And
they stylized the best they could in low
Yeah,
low
speaking
definition.
of which, we have a new Indiana Jones to come watch. But it's a much older Harrison Ford, but is he still hot?
No. He peaked at 40, but then after that, I don't know.
He peaked at Temple of Doom, or...
Yeah, we could talk about movies. That's a different topic.
Yeah, but we love our movies, but
just kind of the environment that you grow up in, and pretty much anybody who sees me either at work or just strangers walking around, they go, "Oh, you look just like Marilyn Monroe. I love your 1950s style." And honestly, growing up, we had that weekly routine of going in a time capsule back in time to my grandparents' house. And we would watch silly movies from the 1950s with Audrey Hepburn or Katharine Hepburn and all these old actors and actresses in these movies. And it's such a comforting thing, the 1950s, like music and TV, not necessarily politics or anything like that, but because we've evolved from that. But the way media was back then is very comforting to me. And I find a lot of, the way that we were raised also... all under one roof, a bunch of kids.
Small house for a long time.
Very old-fashioned way of living. That's just kind of the way that I choose to live my life, I guess, is very old-fashioned. And
part of it
could be seen as outdated, but I don't really see it that way.
Part of it, I think, because my grandparents are who Madeline is talking about. So there's a generation gap between, it wasn't her grandparents, it was her great-grandparents. And so having it be our great-grandparents, I mean, we started out, so just a little background, for 20 years since Madeline was 1, we've been going every Friday to my grandparents' house for lunch. And it started out that we would like do things like we'd go to the rose garden, or we'd go to the park, or we would take the beach even. We would take the opportunity. But as they got older, it ended up becoming something like, okay, well, it's hot or it's cold. What are we going to do? So it kind of became this routine that we would watch a movie. We're going to eat lunch together. No
cookies
TV,
and ice cream.
Have our cookies and ice cream, and then retreat to the room to watch a movie. And so if you can imagine having to come up with a new movie 52 weeks out of the year for
20
years.
It's like 1,000
and not
movies.
Just that, but they had to be rated PG or G because grandma would not do
she wouldn't
no
have
swear
any
words.
She was the purest person on this planet.
I remember one of the last movies we watched before she passed was the Wire with the tightrope walker.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
And she was sitting on this edge of her seat the entire time, sweating it out. And I'm like, oh, maybe this wasn't the best, because she was such a sweet soul, such a sensitive person. And so, I mean, we've maintained Friday lunches even since she passed. We haven't actually missed one. Her memorial service was on a Friday. And now we can watch with Grandpa. We can watch...
We could
probably watch all the Marvel movies at this point now because Grandpa can handle it. But, part of that is like, how many movies can you find? How much culture,
where do you look?
Musicals, comedies, all of these things that you kids have had this exposure on Friday movie day with our grandparents. And, I think that you have this amazing opportunity to take these two, your culture of being in your 20s and having all of these people that you're related to at your young age, being in the service industry to where, how many people do you think that you talk to on a daily basis when you're at work?
I would probably guess at least 1,000 on one shift, 8 hours being on the register, talk to at least 1,000 people.
Probably
just transactions. It feels like that.
Yeah, it feels like that.
And some of the people out there they remember me, but I don't remember them. And they come up and they're like, oh, Meadow, hey, how are you? I'm like, hey, I don't remember your name. How are you? And
what have you learned about people by serving? Patterns. You get into habits of doing things well or poorly based on repetition. Well, you've had a chance to try to up level through the books that you've read, the home environment that you've tried to bring that environment to work with both the folks that work behind the counter and your customer relations. And most people are great, but what have you learned about dealing with people when you do it in such high volume?
I made a TikTok the other day where I was talking about this, where I've determined that dealing with people in an environment where I am serving them is a lot like driving, in where you have to react offensively. And what that means is you don't react to be offended, but you have to mentally, in your mind, you have to say, just like driving, I have to be aware of everybody who's around me. I have to make safe decisions, and I have to make sure that I know what I'm doing when I'm driving or talking with people. And it's a lot like that. And a lot of that has to do with reading people. I read a lot of books, and I also read a lot of people as well. And if you're on the register like I am, and you're talking to someone, and they are looking down or at their phone, or they're just kind of like not there, I'm not going to be like, hey, how's your day going? Do you have any plans for the 4th of July? I'm not really going to put a lot of effort into talking to someone who clearly doesn't want to talk to me. That's something I've had to learn.
Pull them out of their shell.
Yeah, no, I'll be like, okay, go ahead right there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make a conversation with them because that takes energy away from me trying to make something happen to where that person doesn't want to talk to me. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. You don't have to talk to me, whatever.
I think it's some of the best training that you could possibly be in.
Yeah.
Is face-to-face retail, food service, barista in a high-end environment, a luxury environment.
Because that's something that everybody wants, is sweets and coffee. If not coffee, sweets. Everybody likes sugar. Everybody likes dessert. And some people are real picky about it, and they like their dessert a certain way, and I have to be the bad guy and tell them, oh, we can't do that way, sorry. But most people are generally understanding. And then there's the families who come in, and they're great attitude and they look around at the store and they're like, oh, we've never been here. This is so great. What do you recommend? Then I can put more energy into saying, oh, how's it going? You know, how's your day going? How old are your kids? Oh, are they in school? Like, I put a lot more effort into talking to people who actually want to talk to me, and that reading someone mentality that I have when I'm on the register, I'm gotten pretty good at, I would say. And my boss says, oh, you're so great at the register. Just stay on the register all day. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. I signed up to be a barista, but I'll be on the register. That's fine. Yeah. So
to talk a little bit about the service that you have at work and what, you know, you're kid number 3 out of 7, right? So you have 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers.
That's
like immediate to you before, or actually 3 younger brothers before we get to baby sister number 7.
That was, yeah. I had a previous job before the one I was at where I was known as Jeffrey's sister. And that was my identity, was, oh, it's Jeffrey's sister. And that, it was fine. It was a good job. I liked it while I was there, but
Jeffrey had worked at this establishment for several
10
years,
years
in
prior.
10 years in advance. So
yeah.
you can understand, the audience can understand a little bit about why you might be known as Jeff's kid sister.
Yeah,
versus your own identity. Maybe not the greatest for you, but
yeah.
I mean, he had a decade head start on you.
Not the greatest self-image booster.
This one is all your own.
This one, I went out on my own on a whim.
You didn't even ask for help.
She encouraged me. She's like, oh, you should go work at this place. I was like, yeah, right. I'm never leaving wherever I was working before.
Kid Sisterville.
But then, you know, things started to happen. I didn't want to be there anymore, and I went out on a whim, and I went to, like, the guest services, and I was like, hey, are you guys hiring? They're like, yeah, just scan this QR code, apply online, whatever, they'll get back to you. And I was like, all right, that's not good enough for me right now. Thank you, though. So I went down to where I wanted to be, and I talked to the manager there, and I was like, hey, I'm going out on a whim. Are you guys hiring? I would love to work for this company. And he was like, yeah. And he took me up and he talked to me. He's like, I'm going to tell my manager about you. I really like you. And then that guy's not at the company anymore. But
thank goodness.
He appreciated.
He appreciated my assertiveness and my, you know, action.
So
let's talk about that. Let's hold on that for a minute, because
this
is a really big deal. The previous job that you had, it wasn't that. Well, okay, so if we rewind the clock a little bit, I had gone down to establishment number 1, and that your mother and I were patrons of for many years, and we talked to the owner, and we said, hey, we got this 15-year-old kid. We school him at home. Mm-hmm. You can do whatever you want to him, with him. Like, he just wants to learn about food. And he interviewed.
It was a restaurant job.
It was a restaurant job.
Yeah.
And they took him illegally with no paperwork or pay for a year. And 10 years later, he was still there and had moved up the ranks.
It was a family
right?
relationship.
He had left and come back.
He had left and come back, but at the same, and that they had a change of ownership as well, and they maintained him in his role through the switch. So if we look at going back to when Jeffrey had taken the first job at that it was a bakery. It was a small family-run bakery. It was the natural progression for you to get a job there because you were in there all the time. They knew you. They all liked you. We were in there all the time.
Yeah.
Jeffrey was working all the time, and we would go see. But
to be fair, before I started working there, I had gotten 2 jobs on my own.
Yep.
Working at a bookstore, working at a dress boutique.
Yep.
Both ended during the pandemic. But coming out of 2020, starting 2021, I wanted to get working again.
So my question, though, is, and it is, as you mentioned, you have had multiple times since you started working where you've had 2 jobs at a time, and you set goals like, I want to either buy this thing or I want to go to this place, and you set these goals and you end up working really hard, 2 jobs, you're doing whatever it takes in order to raise the money in order to achieve these goals. Mm-hmm. Do you think that where does that, because there's so many people that listen that have teenagers or like in our age, Jeff, in your dad and I's age bracket, that have kids, like where does that go-getter thing come from? Do you think that's something that can be taught? Do you think that that's something that you're like subconsciously you say, I see my parents and they work hard, so I want to work hard? Or is it like I see movies and like, we're not going to be offended if you say, no, Mom and Dad, it's like not from you. And I'm not trying to make it about us. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to say, like, if you could cookie cutter this and say, I want to duplicate this into this family or that family, is it too late if they start doing it in the teen years, or is it something like, well, you better condition kids from babies? Like, where does it come from? How do you at 21 end up wanting to work 2 jobs and buy a golden doodle? Like, where's that come from?
I feel like there's a lot of different answers for that. And I think if I were to use athlete an athlete kind of demonstration, which is like, why do you lift? Is to get to where you need to go, with your body. And for me, I did classical ballet for 10 years, and the best reward that I would get was after on a Saturday, coming home at 5 p.m., taking my hair down from being up all day, getting to lie on my bed and just feel all of the pain that my body was in, all of the soreness of my bones and my muscles and my feet, just being able to lie on my back and just breathe and relax. That was the most rewarding feeling of a long days, because I knew that I did a good job and I knew that I worked hard. And that initiative to work hard came, honestly, I think, if I were to pinpoint one thing, from living in such a big family, because I didn't have report cards to work to be like, okay, I did a good job. I studied. I got an A on this paper. That's good. I didn't have that kind of pressure. So I kind of had to find that in other ways. And I think that human beings do have the desire to push and work hard to feel some sort of satisfactions with themselves. Because if you don't do anything and you're not getting any satisfaction with your life, that is where depression and things can sink in. And also, if you work too hard, you think, I'm not working hard enough, there's a line between those two things, if that makes sense. And the working hard of, I don't know if it's the same with Jeffrey and Joe, older brothers, but I know for me it was a lot of watching kids, taking Nessie for walks so mom could take a nap, like that kind of responsibility that I had at a really young age really pushed me to work hard, like cleaning up the whole house while dad's been gone for the weekend. That was our thing that we did. Pushing through to get to some sort of satisfaction with yourself or some sort of reward. I feel like I'll just be able to feel the reward so much more if I do it myself. If I work 2 jobs for 350 days out of the year so I could have a 10-day vacation in Paris and have enough money to go, that's going to be more rewarding because I saved up myself and I
made it happen.
I didn't have to depend on anybody to make that happen other than me. And I don't really know if that's something that you can teach someone, but I honestly, I don't know. It's something that I also think that it's a mindset thing, to where, are you somebody who likes to serve and likes to give out of the goodness of your heart? If you're like somebody who likes to do acts of service, if you like working with people, or are you just somebody who isn't? Like, I know my coworkers, they like, oh, I hate people. I hate working with people. This is the worst. I am only doing this to make money. And I don't know. I like working with people. I think people are really interesting. Growing up, I was pretty sheltered. I didn't really get to see a lot of I didn't really get to see a lot of outside other than what I was just exposed to growing up, which was cupcakes and rainbows and Grandma Carol and being in a very safe environment. And I can be naive.
Your friends were
some
born.
Things. Literally. My mom and dad made me friends, literally. And going outside in the world, learning about people who grew up very differently than me, it's very interesting to me. And I think I love talking to people. I think people can be out of their mind insane, and I'll just be like, oh, that's really, really interesting. Same with dealing with difficult customers. I love dealing with difficult customers because they are absolutely insane, and I'm the one in the position to help fix it. And I think, I'm the one who can fix this situation by dealing with this crazy, insane person. And it's a skill that takes a long time to develop. Just not getting offended by people.
What's your philosophy for that? Let's double click on that topic for a minute and see.
How do you not get offended by the Karens
what's your
of this
philosophy?
world?
Like somebody comes at you and they're doing something or saying something weird, and you're in a service job. Your job is to serve them and try to help them.
Customer's always right.
Customer's always right. Like, what is your philosophy for that engagement toward resolution?
I would say that everything I always tell myself, I tell some of the coworkers I ask, I tell my coworkers this too sometimes if they ask, is like, that's the only way they know how to get what they want. And that's the only way they know how to communicate. It's not my fault that they don't have enough human decency to communicate in a patient, ethical manner. That's the only way they know how to get what they want. And that's what everybody's goal is at the end of the day. Everybody needs to get what they want. And that's what you guys have taught me as well. But also the psychology behind that is like, you have your mind, and that's all that you've got. You don't know what's inside other people's heads. You don't know what other people are really going through. And trying to make somebody understand what an entire other physical being is going through is extremely difficult. And if I had this happen the other day. There was this lady at work, and she was going absolutely insane. She was yelling, being just super nasty, super horrible, and I felt something in my chest, and I was like, ooh, that's interesting. I want to fix that. But I don't have a management position, so it's not really my job to fix it. But I get really intrigued. I'm like, oh, okay. I want to see how I can de-escalate the situation and fix it. That's what I want to do. But I didn't have to, so
Did it get resolved pretty simply, or was it?
But also something about people is that some people just want to be mad. They don't want an explanation. They don't want to feel better. They just want to be pissed. And that lady just wanted to be pissed. She didn't want things to be better, even if it would have gotten her what she wanted. She just wanted to be upset. And, I'm not innocent of that. I've had my grumpy days. Everybody has. We're all human. But, sometimes there's drivers who just want to drive recklessly and want to be a danger to the road because they're not thinking clearly when they're driving, just like they're not thinking clearly when they're around other people.
So in order to go a little 180 here, okay, I'm going to ask, best, and this is just gut response. What were we talking about? Snap decisions or snap?
Blink. We're talking about Blink.
Okay, Blink from Malcolm Gladwell. Okay, best movie ever. First thing off your top of your head.
This is very different. Best movie or my favorite?
Okay, favorite movie.
Favorite movie?
Austin Land.
No. Well, it's different because my favorite movie isn't the one that most influenced me, but my favorite movie.
Okay.
It's got to be either The Count of Monte Cristo from 2002, which is the best year because that's the year I was born, or the 2015 Cinderella reboot.
Okay.
Because that one was my favorite, and it's really good, and Kenneth Branagh directed it.
I know. Okay. Best album.
Songs About Jane by Maroon 5.
Okay. Best musician.
Single artist.
Adele.
Adele.
Okay.
In my opinion.
19, 21, does it matter?
21.
Okay, 20. Okay. And best book, like one that you've I know you've read a lot of good books, but like the one that you would go back to again,
Well, the one that, like I said, there's my favorites, and then there's the ones that most influenced me. 2015 Cinderella most influenced me. That movie changed me as a person. Crest by Marissa Meyer. It is the third book in the Lunar Chronicles series. That one most influenced me as a person. But my favorite book is probably Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. That's just so good. Or Dracula by Bram Stoker.
And then let's see, a favorite location that you've been to so far, like physical vacation or like museum, or it could be anywhere, just like an actual away from home place that you've been to so far.
Honestly, Detroit is up there because of what happened while we were gone. That was like a God experience that changed my life. I really like Disneyland. Disneyland's always great.
Disneyland or California Park, or are they both the same?
California is great, but
we love you, Gary.
Gary, wink. We love you, but
Disneyland's got a special place.
Disneyland's pretty great.
So I ask all of those questions to lead up to best artist.
Painter artist?
Yes.
art is such a picky question because, like, best could mean who's the most realistic. Best could mean who's the most moving to you. I don't believe that art is good or, I believe that no art is bad. I believe that you could work your whole life to achieve the best artist you could be, and your art's never going to get any better. It's just going to get more precise because there's no such thing as bad art. But best as in my favorite?
Yes, your favorite.
Is Vincent van Gogh, for sure, born March 30th, 1835. No, 55?
35.
35. Born March 30th, 1835.
Monet was
died
born in 40.
July 29th, 1890 in, I don't want to pronounce the name of the country he died in because I don't want to be wrong.
So what is it about?
I think he died in France.
What is it about
he died in Erlay, France?
Erlay, France, yeah.
No. Avouillers, France?
Avouillers?
Yeah.
What is it about Vincent van Gogh? Because clearly there was, you bring it up, like Starry Night, you told me about recently. You named your dog Vincent van Gogh.
I would never name a human child after him. I would name a dog after him, but not a human.
What is it about his style, or because there are a lot of other artists around that same impressionistic period, what is it about Vincent van Gogh that was so intriguing to you to say, you know what, I want to know more about that? Because you've mentioned throughout this podcast that there are things that you want to know more about, and like coffee, and you're passionate about what you want to know about. So when you choose to know about something, you go kind of all in to getting to know about it. And you chose Vincent van Gogh, and do you know why or when or
honestly
what it's been about?
His story as an artist, I just think is so interesting because, I'm going to be a little dramatic here, his life represents so much death at the same time, and I think that's really cool because he was born on the exact same day his mother had a stillborn child, and he's lived with that his whole life.
And was named after the stillborn child.
Yes, his mother had a child. He was going to be named Vincent van Gogh, and he was stillborn. And then 1 year later, on the exact same day, she had a child named Vincent van Gogh, and he survived. And he felt like he had that shadow over him his whole life of, oh, you will never be as good as the child that we were supposed to have because you came after him, if that makes sense. And I know everything about him. I could write books about him. It's crazy. But one of the things that I love about his work is that he would do the exact same thing I do with work, where he would put his blood, sweat, tears, age, time, and everything into his work, trying to not be good, but just trying to express how he felt. Like, if you look at Van Gogh's art, it's squiggly, it's all over the place. He did not attempt realism. Well, he tried to in his earlier years. His first probably 5 years of painting, the first 3 years, he didn't even paint. He did like charcoals and like pencil drawings. But his first early years, he did very dark, somber paintings, and he tried to be realistic. And then he went to Paris to visit his brother and live there, and that's when he saw the influence of Edgar Degas, Monet, Manet, all of the painters of that time period, and he saw that they used a lot of pastel colors, very light, very colorful, very like life. Like, that's what he saw, is he saw life from those paintings, and he took inspiration and he started painting a lot more colorful things, not necessarily Paris while he was living there, but he painted a lot of flowers, and he painted a lot of landscape and clouds and lovely colors. But he was a country person at heart, so he went back to the country he had a heart for the broke and the misfortunate, and that's what he was. He was broke. His entire 11-year drawing painting career, I think it was something like that. He was broke. His brother paid for everything. He only sold one painting in his entire artist career, and it was to his brother. His own brother bought his painting because he just wasn't popular enough to sell any paintings. And the reason I say all this is because also his most popular painting, if you know Van Gogh, you might not know anything, but you know Starry Night. Starry Night is his most popular painting. It is in the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and it is his most popular painting ever. And when you look it up, it's very, I don't even know how to describe it. It's what someone's mind looks like, I think.
It's surreal,
It's
sure.
what his mind looked like. And the history behind that painting is it was painted 1 year before he passed, or he killed himself. That's another story. And it was painted while he was in the Saint Remy mental asylum. Because what happened is the months prior, he cut his ear off, he injured himself, and his brother was so concerned for him that he paid out of his own pocket, just like he did with everything. He paid for him to go to this asylum so that someone would be there to watch him and take care of him and feed him, because that's what he wasn't doing for himself, where he wasn't in any weird relationships with women and stuff like that. So when he was the most taken care of, the most at peace with himself, when he was the most malnourished, when he was the most nourished, when he had everything that he needed to survive, he painted Starry Night, and that speaks volumes. And if you were to look at Starry Night, you know, it has a cypress, and cypress trees are Italian, and they were traditionally planted outside of cemeteries, and they represent death, and he paints a lot of cypresses, and I think that's really cool. But
I love that. I love that, you know, what you're saying is like what mankind, your dad and I were even talking about this morning, is when our expectations are set, oftentimes based on our own, where we're at. Like if I'm feeling depleted and exhausted and tired and overworked and hungry and hangry, angry, lonely, tired, then the product that I produce is going to reflect that, the expectations that I have when I go into work. Like you and I have talked about, even where you work now, you take a few minutes before you go into work to like set your mindset that I'm going to have a good day. I'm going to be happy. The customers I meet, like
wine
we're
reflects the vintages and the years of wines. Reflect the soil composite, the temperatures that year, how dry it was.
His most famous work of all time, the one that's the most shared, the one that's on all of the posters and all of the
not the most expensive painting of all time.
Right.
You'd be surprised, but the most, like,
certainly the most well known.
If you look up Vincent van Gogh paintings, the first one that'll pop up is Starry Night.
Always
and
Starry
that was
Night.
the one that he produced when he was the most cared for.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I never looked at it that way.
Yeah, I didn't think about that until I heard your message about peace, and I got that image in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What was the original question?
Talk a little bit.
The original question was, where did it come? Like, where did your intrigue into? Like, what do you think spurred your desire for following after him?
I want to say it was a dream that I had, but honestly, I don't remember. I think, honestly, when I was 16, I was looking through, you know how on Google they have the suggested tabs? There was an article that read, the gun that Vincent van Gogh used to kill himself goes on auction for $1.3 million, I think. And I was like, oh, Van Gogh, that's a artist guy, I think. And I saw his, this was when I started painting myself again for the first time, pretty much ever. I'd never really been good at painting, and then I kind of picked it up. I was like, oh, this is, I can understand this. This is interesting. And I started reading about it. I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because Vincent van Gogh, he was an artist who suffered a lot while he was in his artistic career, which is not really what you see. Like Picasso lived very long. He had a very long life, had a lot of children. He lived in Paris. He had a lot of money eventually to paint. Monet, like, he lived in a beautiful place. He was able to paint every day. Edgar Degas, he was able to sculpt. He was able to be around things that he loved. And Vincent van Gogh didn't really have that luxury. He was definitely more of a gritty,
starving artist,
yes. And another thing about him that I find so interesting is when I was looking him up throughout the years, I'm 20 turning 21, I started learning about him when I was 16, is that he was in the church before he started becoming an artist. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. What happened there? And he didn't start producing his work until after he fell out of his relationship with God. And honestly, I don't really know how I feel about that, because if he had never fallen out of the church and pursuing what God wanted him to do and listening to God and serving the people. What he did before he became an artist was he was
tried to be a minister.
Evangelist, I think. Yeah, he was an evangelist, and he went to a very, very poor coal mining town, and he would give everything he could. He gave the shirt off his back. He gave up his food. He gave up his mattress. He was killing himself to serve the people of the Lord, supposedly, and they were still dying. And he's like, well, if there exists a God like this, if a God is so unloving to let this happen, then there must not be a God, you know?
And there was another piece to it too, which was that he was doing what Christ called him to do, which was to serve and to minister to the people, and he was doing it regardless of his own ability to eat or have a place to sleep or clothes to wear. And the church that was sponsoring him got offended. The church leadership got offended. They're like, "Oh, you're above this. You're above living with nothing.
You're above these people.
You're above these people. You're above living." And he's like, "I'm coming to serve. I'm coming to give."
Because he's actually
they're
doing
not
the
willing.
work.
They're not, and they're not willing to do it. They're not willing to come down from their high position. So sometimes when we look at, and we've talked about it on this podcast, our relationship as a family is with God and with the people, and that communion is what makes up the church to us, not the religion, not the hoop jumping, not the dogmatic persecution and pressure and constrained thinking that a lot of people who go or think about church come at it from that position.
Yeah.
I mean, Jessica's a pastor of an evangelical church on staff here in California and has a podcast related with that. And that's a very freeing situation. So when you look at the dogmatic pressure and persecution that Van Gogh was under and how, that came with the money came with strings attached.
His father was also a pastor.
That's right.
Like his whole family was in the church, and they thought that him being an evangelist would be like a shame to the family name.
And I want to bring up one other thing, too, just a point in history. And I think this makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I found out probably a year ago, and it really made sense to me, the modern evangelical, quote-unquote, non-denominational church means that typically the pastors are entrepreneurs. They are not on a benefit or a salary from the Baptist church or the Catholic church or the archdiocese of the Episcopalian ministry of such and such, right? They said, hey, I believe in God. Here's my shingle, and we'll work a second job or live out of savings if we have to. And our family tends to be entrepreneurs. And so it seems kind of amazing that we would naturally gravitate toward the types of churches which are founded by entrepreneurs who are trying to create something of service, even at the risk, as Van Gogh did, of poverty or financial ruin.
He was not a stranger to poverty. He
going
was
without.
broke.
And the people of the establishment who come from a position where they're on salaries and they're supported by a very large and potentially controlling environment are very threatened by the evangelicals' position to go off the dole.
Brother then, because his brother believed in him and his brother supported him, like how did their relationship?
Yeah.
How did they end up having such a close relationship?
So it was Van Gogh, the first one that died. Then it was him. Then it was his brother Theo. Theo and Van Gogh were the closest. He wasn't close with any of his other siblings except for Theo. He wasn't even close with his parents except for his brother, his little brother, who loved him and looked up to him so much so that 6 months after Van Gogh died, Theo died because he was so heartbroken and he loved his brother so much and he thought that he couldn't take care of him. And that's why he died. And after both Van Gogh's died,
really the sister-in-law,
all of the paintings, all of the letters, all of the drawings, everything Van Gogh ever made in his entire life went to Theo's wife, who was now a widow with a 1-year-old child. And she was sitting there with all of these paintings, husbandless, not knowing what to do. And she took the initiative to sell his work, because that's another great thing about him is even though he was broke, the things that he was able to create he wasn't broke in his mind. He saw so many wonderful, beautiful things, and that was his life's passion, was to get what he saw in his mind onto something that was able to be seen by other people. And that was before he started painting. He actually worked as an art dealer, and people would be like, oh, this painting doesn't look good, or these rich snobby people with their noses up being like, oh, this isn't real art or something. And
he painted
Vincent,
people at work.
Vincent would say, are you kidding? You don't know anything about art. You're a snob. You don't know anything. This isn't. He was very passionate about what art meant. And that's what I love about him, is that he was so passionate to his work that he did it till his dying day, until he took his own life.
Do you think that everyone has a little bit of that in them, if they can just maybe find it, uncover it, like a little bit of a love for something?
I would certainly hope so, because that kind of drive is going to be one of your most valuable assets. And the drive to either create or to make money or to have a family, that is one of the most important things that you could have in your life, because it is your own. You know, somebody else can't really give you the passion to work, you know? Mm-hmm. Your boss can be like, oh, I'll give you something motivational. If you don't work, you know, you're out of here. That's not going to really motivate you. But if you surround yourself with the things that you like and you go out and you find what you like. I found Van Gogh totally on a whim. I wasn't really interested in painting or art that much, but then I found out that article and it changed my life. And I don't know why. That's the thing, is like there's so many other artists that are not nearly as dramatic and have happy endings, but he just speaks to me so much. It's like I have a connection with him.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, even the places, like when you mentioned Detroit, it was to go to that art exhibit. When you mentioned, you know, Adele and 21, when you mention Maroon 5 and Songs About Jane, like all of these things that you say, you know, Cress and your Cinderella 2015. It's not that everybody has a tragic story, in my opinion. It's they all have stories.
Yeah.
And what it sounds like is you don't just want to hear the highlight reel.
Exactly.
You want to hear somebody's story. And in my opinion, people's stories, the stories that we tell, we're not looking to hear just the peaceful highlight reel, the everything is awesome. Yeah. Everything is cool.
Another thing about Van Gogh is that his family was so ashamed of him for being such a disgrace, but if he wasn't a disgrace, we wouldn't know the Van Gogh name.
Yeah, and there's we've mentioned to it on the podcast, that's like Voltaire, you know, there's death and then there's life. Last episode we talked about the yin and the yang and the balance, and it would appear that every good story, especially as we watch a lot of biographies and biopics, and every good story, if you don't have the struggle aspect, then you're not coming out on the other side, and we hope that Van Gogh ended up coming out on the other side, you know, getting to live his glory in the afterlife, or however you want to look at it, whatever your beliefs are. But to be able to see a completed story, it sounds like what other people call dramatic or being dramatic, what we would like to call is complete. And so having something complete and then being able to be completed by the end of our life.
I also see that it's definitely different, but the way that Van Gogh saw himself was not good. And when I think about that, like, if we were to be like, oh, you're such a great painter, he's like, no, I'm not a great painter. I'm terrible. Look at my work. It's not like this person. Not like, he always compared himself to other artists at the time, but he never accepted for himself that he was good enough. So that's why he worked so hard, was to not necessarily be good, but to
outwork the gap between what he saw himself and where he saw his mentors.
Not necessarily, because he was always told by his peers, like, oh, you didn't draw this the right way. It's not a foot. When you draw a foot, it's not supposed to look like that. Do it again. And then he would spend all of his money on art supplies and models, and he wouldn't eat, and he would kill himself to the point of starvation for his craft. And when I think about that, I think of when Jesus was called good, and he says, why do you call me good?
And there's no one good.
None good but the Father.
None good but the Father. I think about that. It's not exactly the same, because Jesus was not as self-deprecating as Vincent van Gogh, but, you know, I wouldn't compliment him. I don't think if I ever got a chance to talk to him, I would be like, I would ask myself, what would you ask if you got to talk to him? And I would say, I would ask what he thought his favorite painting that he ever did was.
What do you think he would say?
I feel like he wouldn't give me a good answer. I feel like he would be like, I don't like any of my paintings.
I feel like he wouldn't give you a good answer either.
I don't.
I think in those situations, the best question would be, what are you working on now?
I would think, what are you working on now? Or I would ask, what do you see right now?
How do you see?
How do you? I want to know how you see things.
Yeah.
And I think that's not.
What do you think he would say to that?
He had a very vibrant way of expressing the way that he saw things. If you ever read any of his letters he ever wrote his brother, he would say, "I'm intoxicated with color. I think that the leaves that blow through the trees, or the way that the way that the light shines through the dancing leaves is unlike anything that I could ever express." He was very poetic. He read a lot of books too. He was very poetic. But as far as his own work, he was not proud of it. And that's something that, if you create something so gorgeous as Starry Night, or as Sunflowers, or, you create something that's so beautiful and you're not proud of it, what does that have to say about you,
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for 1 second as we get to kind of some wrap up and some summary.
Mm-hmm.
That drive, you said it earlier in the podcast, where he wasn't painting for a while. He started sketching and doing charcoals.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that drive of, like, what we see on canvas is an expression, you covered it earlier, of how he was feeling. He was trying to get his feelings out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And he got his feelings out later through color. And he said he was intoxicated by color, and he was able to obviously express his feelings through color. But what does that teach you as a living person, as a young person with their whole life in front of you, that, how ought we to live our lives that we might have our own emotions expressed into the world through the color of making coffee, or the color of how you get ready in the morning to present yourself to the world?
I feel like self-expression and creativity is something that is so unique to yourself, like making movies, writing books, literature. I say a book is somebody's dream that they had to take years out of their life to put into pen and paper and try to describe. It's like trying to take your mind, a part of your mind, the way that you see things, and put it in words. It's incredibly difficult. Like J.R.R. Tolkien, he took like 20 years to write the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it's a dream that he had, and he was able to accomplish it. I think that it's a lot more time consuming to write books than it is to make paintings, but
depends on what you're doing, right?
Exactly. But that's why I love books, and I love literature, and I love art, is because that's all somebody's creativity put into something that you can see. And the great thing about that is that everyone's going to see that thing differently, and they're going to try to figure out what it means for themselves differently, and no one's going to see it the same way as you do.
Out of the mouth of babes. Here we have a 20-year-old daughter, number 3 out of 7.
Yeah.
And somebody that we're very pleased and proud, and almost like, I look at you and I look at you with expectation, not that you would become a doctor because we want you to be a doctor, or you make a lot of money because we want you to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But I'm in expectation of seeing you paint that masterpiece for yourself, because I think that there's a lot of emotion tied up in you, and I think your ability to express yourself has continued to get better and better as you've gotten older. I think you're wise beyond your years. I think you have a great head on your shoulders, and I'm just expecting and excited, not really sure, almost like a Christmas present, right? We get to unwrap your masterpiece at some point in the future, and we don't even know necessarily what that is going to look like or what medium it's going to take form in, but that it's going to be great, and that we're excited to see what it looks like.
Thank you. I also want to say that in the same aspect, a lot of music is like this. I don't really listen to a lot of modern music because I'm very careful about what I put in my mind, and a lot of the music that plays nowadays is not the most motivational for growing your mind. That's just my opinion. But also, movies are like that. You know, somebody could watch The Godfather and say it's the best movie they've ever seen, and somebody could watch The Godfather and be like, I didn't really get it. You know, that's
sacrilege. Oh.
it's the same thing as art and books in a way, but it's a lot easier for more people to understand because, you know, some people can see like, the last thing on earth that I would ever want to do is go to a museum on my day off. Ooh. Or somebody could be like, I've been waiting to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York City for years. And if I had one day in New York City, that's what I would do. And there's a lot of people who wouldn't see things that way, and that's fine. I don't want to.
Let's talk. Okay, there's a young audience out there of mid-20s that are dealing with all the problems that the 20-somethings are dealing with. Yeah. There's another audience out there of young parents, 35 to 45, who have kids between the ages of 0, 6 months to a year, all the way up to teenagers. Mm-hmm. Let's take art as the subject for a moment and say, how can we make art more approachable? Because not everybody is going to jump on an airplane like you and I did.
I think that they already
Just one second.
Art more approachable in the sense that we have like TikTok. Like that's art. TikTok is art.
Are we talking about art like
Instagram Reels is art?
Drawings and paintings?
We're talking about the concept of drawings and paintings, literature, all the things that, because you've gone down the rabbit hole with art, right? Yeah. And you've expressed that, on social media and obviously on this podcast and in the paintings that are all around your room. But if you look at, I see a divide here that I think we can bridge. And the divide is that not everybody's going to spend $2,000 or $3,000, jump on an airplane and go to Detroit so that they can go see 75 Van Gogh paintings worth $3 billion. Yeah. And brave through the weather systems of being sub-zero temperatures to go do that like you and I did in January, or go to the Modern Museum of Art. But there's also, you can go look at a Van Gogh painting online. Anybody can do that. But is there an in-between? Is there watercolors? Is there, simple pencil drawings or sketches or things that people could do right now as a 20-something to start to apply the aesthetic of art in their own expression through mediums that may not be as fancy or as tough to reach as an oil painting that takes 2 weeks to dry?
I feel like it depends. Honestly, I would say it depends on the person, because it's like for art, art is such a mass majority to where some people would look at a painting of a black dot on a white background and be like, this is so deep. Oh my gosh, you have no idea. This is like so deep. And then there would be people who would look at a Van Gogh painting and be like, I don't really get it. He wasn't really that good. And, both people can be right because it's their own opinion. I would say that if you're interested in art, if it's something that someone's not forcing you to be interested in, like growing up, you're an artist. Grandpa was an artist. Grandpa Dan, Grandpa Keith, not really Grandpa Keith, Grandpa Dan, yeah. Grandpa Richard, Grandpa Gil, like a lot of artists were in the family growing up, so I was always kind of surrounded by it. But if art is really something that you kind of want to figure out on your own, I would definitely say, if you want to start making art on your own, don't ever beat yourself up for not being good, because that's something that takes practice and time and effort. But if you go for realism and it doesn't really look that good, and just don't be upset with yourself, because that's something that takes, there's a quote from Picasso where a stranger asked him to draw a picture of him, and he did, and then Picasso tried to charge him an insane amount of money, and he said, why are you charging me so much? It was just a small drawing. And he said, that's something that took me years to learn how to do. That is years of work.
Even if on paper it only took me 5 minutes, it took me years to get
there. Decades to be able to do it in 5 minutes.
To be able to do that. So, that's why I see so much value in it.
I think that with anything, and if you look at the history, and before they had the printed word, they would either draw cave pictures or stained glass or whatever. There's this word of mouth way that we as human beings pass on through the generations the things that we were exposed to. And so what I can definitely see, like when your dad and I were growing up, like part of our only introduction to classical music was Tom and Jerry or Looney Tunes or like cartoons.
My entire and 90s music that I know of is because of like cartoons like Shrek and
Shrek and Cars and
Cars.
So it seems like even billboards, like I think that the best way for us to continue to maintain classical things like Shakespeare and, Mozart and Beethoven and even Van Gogh and Monet is to have, the occasional billboard pop out. And yeah, they might have a starry night and there's some weird, soda can in front of it or something like that. Or there's some TikTok and the TikTok's set to Tchaikovsky. And there's some, like, as we continue to interweave these things, it does pop up inside of us a new affinity for the passing down, the continue. So the fact that we're even talking about it is keeping it alive. Mm-hmm. The fact that we're on YouTube, the fact that Andrew's going to put reels together, the fact that however it is that we're going to express our appreciation for these things that you've studied for 15 years or whatever, however long your whole life, movies and Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, and the fact that we did on Fridays, it's just continuing to bring the presence and keep alive something that otherwise, if we didn't keep sharing it through our word of mouth, would be forgotten.
Yeah. Another thing about why I'm more into art and literature is also because I did ballet for a really long time. I didn't do jazz. I didn't do classic, like contemporary. I didn't really do the modern dance things because I loved ballet so much. And ballet is very old-fashioned, and you need to look up Degas. Very classical. Piano, classical music. I know I listen to classical music on my free time because of all those years of training. They put classical music, it's a safety thing in my mind, is listening to classical music. I can tell what ballet that's from, all that thing. It makes me feel something, And art is associated with that. Classical music and art are both something that go together. And ballet too. Classical music and ballet go together. And that's just something that growing up I loved. I love ballet. I know a lot about it. I was able to be lucky enough to, when I was done dancing at my school, have a good association with it, because ballet is such a toxic environment where girls get body disorders because they're not skinny enough, or they feel like there are some schools in Russia where women will literally remove ribs from their body so that when they suck in, it's like less, like you're as small as you can be, and it's terrible. And people leave the ballet industry feeling horrible about themselves. And I was lucky enough to be in a school that accepted, I'm a little taller, I'm very white, I'm more muscular, I'm not as skinny as the other girls, but I was able to leave that dance school when I did feeling happy about dance and having a good association with it. And the way that dance trained me was under very intense situations, having to learn probably a full day's worth of choreography in 5 minutes, like quick thinking, able to adapt so quickly and learn something really fast. That's something that I still use to this day.
You also had a very detailed and very demanding, God bless her, instructor.
Yes,
who was exceptional at dance and had taught all over the world. Is literally in Europe right now on her next assignment.
Yeah.
And was tougher. I mean, I don't want to be tough on you unless you're being bad, unless there's something, right? Then I'll be like, all right, here's where we need to be, right, as far as the standard. But I don't want to be harsh. And she was difficult and hard on you to the point of being harsh at times, which with a loving family environment, with a mom and a dad that you can go home and be safe with, and with your own motivation to stay and really try to make the standard that she upheld for you, I think was a net positive.
But I think she also did it out of love, because she also understood
she knows our family
and rest and as hard as she was, it was for the betterment. And so
I think
what
she's
I
a
can encourage anybody who's
net
listening
gem
that has
in
their
our family
kids
history.
involved in any kind of extracurricular activity is be extremely present and cognizant of where you're signing your kid up for, what you're paying for. Get to know the institutions really well if you can, because these extracurricular activities will either make or break your child.
Exactly. And I think back then when I was in my age 12 to 18, like with that school that I was with, I was very scared of her because I didn't want to get in trouble, and I'm a goody two shoes, and I don't do things that'll get me in trouble, and I was the angel student and all that. But I really don't think I could have asked for a better teacher coming back, because when I went to that school, I was coming off of a broken foot, an injury, and she was able to get me on point shoes within less than a year, I think, which is my dream. That was my dream, was to be able to dance on my toes, because I was born in December, and what my dad would do is he would take me to go see the Nutcracker from ages 5 to 8, I think. And then I was like, I want to do that.
And then you start being in the Nutcracker.
And then I started being in the Nutcracker.
From watching it.
And then you're like, I don't care if I never have to do this again. This is so much work.
I don't know how you guys did it, because ballet is so expensive, and you were paying for Joe to do diving. I don't know how you guys did it.
Only by the grace of God go I. And thankfully to your father, he continued to impress upon himself ongoing education. Like, are we going to learn and to better ourselves?
Yeah,
and
I mean, it gets into the career that I have, or the career that you have now, Jessica, that we've literally moved into better careers in our 40s than we could have imagined when we were in our 20s. But it was because we spent 20 years with just full tilt, wide open throttle to do one job, two jobs, three jobs, plus books, plus seminars, plus Tony Robbins tapes on the way to and from the newspaper to go pick up the newspapers to do the newspaper route. So when we saw that Jeffrey had a thing, which was cooking, you had
which
Joe
made you money, not
well,
took a lot of money.
It made him a little money, yeah. But Jeffrey got into cooking. Joe got into competitive springboard diving. We were looking for a thing for you. What's your thing? What's Maddo's thing going to be that she can help wrap her sense of femininity and identity and sense of self into that was uniquely hers? And then, because they have such a demand for boys.
Boys went for free at my school.
Yeah, boys went for free. So Andrew and Osh and Joe all got to participate in the Nutcracker because they needed props. They needed male props to be part of the storytelling. But it was uniquely yours.
Yeah, and that association that I have when I was 10 years old doing the Nutcracker, being in the Center for Performing Arts in San Jose, it's one of the larger theaters that we have in the Bay Area.
There's like 2,000 people in the audience. It's a big
being
crowd.
Being 10 and going backstage and seeing how everything worked and seeing the stage and hearing the live orchestra pit, that is something that I treasure to this day. I listen to the Nutcracker music and I just reminisce of what it was like, all the stress. And back then it was so stressful. I remember lying awake at night many times at 3 a.m. being like, this is so hard. I want to quit. And then I would wake up and I would get ready and I would go to dance school. That was my high school experience, was ballet. And that was, I talked to Joe about this and I said, Joe, you did both. Is diving harder or is ballet harder? And he said that ballet was harder. So I did ballet for 10 years. Very hard, according to him.
Well, thank you for spending your hour plus however long
Today is 4th of July that we're
us.
cutting this on. It'll be available on the 11th on YouTube.
Yes, and we just wanted to tell you how proud of you
Spotify
we are
and Apple
how
iTunes.
thankful we are that you would get to have such a rich life for 2 decades now, going into your birthday is the 21st. Not on the 21st, going to be 21 on your birthday. 2 decades worth of your life compressed into this last hour. Thank you for spending time with us, Madeline. We appreciate you so much.
Love you. You're great.
I love
You're great.
You. Beats working customer service, I'll tell you that.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, or good day, whatever time it is that you're listening to this and that you're watching. We appreciate you and have an awesome rest of your week.
Happy Independence Day.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye.